All right, so that's been a minute, so I hope everyone is here for now, and then we'll welcome anyone that comes in a little bit late. Hopefully they don't miss too much. So welcome to our Business Innovation Solution webinars. This is session 9, and this one is presented by Spare Labs for Planning the Road Beyond Recovery. And our presenters today are going to be Jerome and Christopher. Jerome is Spare's lead data scientist. In this role, he uses statistics and predictive modeling to bring strategic insights to Spare's customers across the globe, and he is the driving force beyond Spare Realize, Spare's cutting-edge microtransit planning tool. And for Christopher, Christopher is Spare's co-founder and chief executive officer. At Spare, Christopher is a leading and technology-driven team member aiming to accelerate the shift towards efficient and accessible mobility by enabling anyone to plan, launch, and analyze a smart transportation network in seconds. As a native of Norway, Christopher moved to Canada to pursue his bachelor's degree in integrated engineering at UBC in 2010. Now, before I hand it off to them, just a few GoToWebinar notes. If you have any questions, you are welcome to ask them using the questions tab as part of the GoToWebinar panel, and we will get to them at the end with whatever remaining time that we have left. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Christopher and Jerome for their presentation. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Oliver. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Yeah, perfect. Good stuff. Thanks so much for jumping on this webinar. And hello from Vancouver. It's great to be on the line here. So as Oliver mentioned, it's going to be myself and Jerome having this presentation. And really the goal of this presentation is that we really hope to make it realize that cities just cannot jump back to and ramp up to what they were doing before, but they really need to look at things fundamentally differently, using new tools and new services in order to kind of plan this road beyond recovery. So what are the kind of the unique challenges that is facing transit right now? I mean, obviously this webinar is very focused on Canada, but these are challenges that we see all around. And what we are seeing is that there's a incredible changing travel pattern. It was definitely true before COVID, but now with COVID and also kind of the recovery from that pandemic, we're seeing this being even more dynamic. People are adopting new modes. They're kind of afraid to some older modes and really looking at how can they move better in this new world. There's also this serious aversion, unfortunately, to public transportation. I mean, I myself use public transportation pretty much every day here in Vancouver, but there are definitely people that I talk to that are genuinely kind of afraid to use it. And we do need to realize that it's probably going to take a while for many of those to get back into that habit, and maybe some of them will never want to get back into it. And then there's also this physical distancing regulation that is putting a serious challenge for transit. Again, not only in Canada, but all over the world, when there's really less capacity physically, and providing the same type of capacity for ridership is really difficult when we have to physically constrain this capacity. One of the trends that really have been seeing is really this focus from moving from being a transit agency to a mobility agency, really looking at what is the task really to be done here. I think we can all agree that the task to be done is to move people from A to B. It may not anymore be simply around just planning out routes and scheduling vehicles. It is actually much more broad than that. And even when I look at how I travel around in Vancouver, I don't own a car myself, so I'm very dependent on all of these different services that are around me. If it's walking, if it's cycling, if it's bike sharing, car sharing, taxi, TNC, transit, etc., etc. I'm actually making this choice every day to figure out what is the best way to move Christopher from A to B today, depending on kind of some of my constraints, if it's time or money or whatever it might be. And we're really starting to see the shift from transit agents really looking at this in a more holistic basis. One of the really interesting things that I've seen is one of our partner agencies in Europe called Columbus, and they have actually changed their mission statement of the transit agency itself to say, hey, we are no longer just a transit agency, we are a mobility agency. And they have put in dedicated budgets to really becoming this in this way, and really thinking about this way, and bringing people on board to their transit agency to think in this way. So it's really exciting to see this. And now we're even seeing this accelerate with these challenges that we're seeing. So when we're looking at kind of the traditional factors for success of transit, you're really looking at how do you best do the trade-off between ridership on one side and coverage on the other side. And this has really been kind of the traditional way of thinking. However, I think we can all agree that 2020 have brought additional factors to consider. You know, the shocks of COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement mean that we also need to consider things like resilience and equity in our transportation systems. And resilience and equity now needs to be planned around, and we by doing things to actually cope with this, we'll be able to see curb cut effects to build stronger networks for everyone. So where are we recovering to? I mean, this is kind of the million dollar question. And how does this destination of recovery really look like? So we are actually right now partnering with 4 Canadian cities to plan both the destination, but also how we get there. And one of the common threads that we are seeing is that transit agencies, more than ever before, need to be innovating and iterating quickly. And in a very un-Canadian way, it needs to be okay that we sometimes fail. I think trying is better than not trying. And we need to just be okay that sometimes us trying will not be successful, but that shouldn't deter us from trying. One of the really interesting cases we've seen in this is one of our partner agencies in the US, Dallas Air Rapid Transit. They have been experimenting tremendously with multiple different services, multiple different ways of thinking, putting in new planning tools, putting in new multimodal tools, and really, really pushing this industry to the point where they were named the most innovative transit agency in the US in 2019 for many of the things that they have really put into place. So with this being said, I'm going to pass it on to Jerome to go over some specific tactics on how we plan this road beyond recovery.
Thanks, Christopher, and hello and bonjour to everybody on the call. So the question that really underpins the title of our presentation is exactly how you, as a transit agency, can plan what that road beyond recovery actually looks like. And we acknowledge that there's a huge variety of possibilities. There are lots of different transport modes and technologies that can work together, kind of like a beautiful mosaic of transportation. And at Spare, we're quite clear that we do a few of them really, really well. And we focus primarily on something called on-demand microtransit and paratransit. And for those of you who aren't familiar with microtransit, for example, it's everything between a taxi and a fixed line bus. So like a taxi, vehicles typically take people from door to door with no real fixed schedule. But just like a bus, those trips are shared or pooled to increase the efficiency of that system. And paratransit is much the same concept, but made specifically available for riders with special mobility needs. And so our day-to-day at Spare is to develop new products and features on our platform all the time. And all of them help agencies slightly tweak their offerings and incrementally improve the experience for riders. But one tool I'm going to show you today, and which I'm very excited about, I think has the potential to revolutionize the way on-demand transit is planned, to make sure that nobody is left behind even before a service is launched. So our team spends a lot of time speaking with transit agencies, and during COVID, that was kind of ramped up as we realized that there needed to be a lot of guiding throughout the problems that we were seeing. And through those conversations, we realized there was a real gap in the market from our perspective. Agencies didn't seem to have a tool they could use to convincingly figure out where it made sense to implement microtransit and where it didn't. And paratransit is kind of a special case because pretty much any city is mandated to have to implement paratransit. But even those systems aren't always particularly well configured. So we built on a new version of our existing transit simulation tool, which we call Spare Realize, to dig into our massive ridership data that's growing every day, to estimate the benefits, but also the drawbacks of implementing and then running microtransit in particular neighborhoods. And not only that, we realized that as ridership would begin to recover, the goalposts would shift for transit agencies. So as Christopher kind of alluded to, and agencies don't want to play by the old rules of the game. They're no longer valid. Instead, there's now a chance for agencies to redesign parts of their transit system from the ground up. And we're not saying that there needs to be a drastic redesign, a complete burning down of old bridges and building them all up again. But there are definitely certain parts of the transit system and the mobility ecosystem in general that could be just done a lot better through planning. And Spare Realize has become the tool that allows agencies to do just that. So, apologies. And I just wanted to give you a quick walkthrough of what Realize can show us in Spare's hometown of Metro Vancouver. So Realize provides users with a wide variety of data layers they can toggle on and off, and you can see that in the video demo right now. And it helps agencies paint a picture of how people move around the city. So it gives you general population statistics to the locations of shopping and healthcare, as well as what we call transit deserts, where there's little transit access for local residents. And the tool even automatically assesses which transit lines are likely to have lost the most ridership during COVID-19, and therefore could have the hours reduced or entirely cut and replaced with something like microtransit. And Realize also generates a microtransit potential layer, like this green one here, that shows you the hotspots of where it might be a good idea to set up microtransit. And then you can draw a zone based on a kind of hunch, or using the data that you see, to see what you might gain from setting up microtransit there. So it's not only how many jobs or transit dependent people actually are theoretically served by the zone, but also some more detailed metrics around the financials of it, the savings that can go directly to the agency, but also the savings that can accrue to society through reduced loneliness, fewer accidents, that kind of thing, as well as the environment through reduced greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, and noise. And then we can dig in further into the details by running very detailed transit simulations with expected fleet sizes, as you saw, and ideal waiting times, and the metrics that you might want to gain from that. So I'm not going to show you the outcomes of that. This was just designed to be a very short demo. But hopefully what you can tell from this tool is that it becomes a really holistic model for assessing the return on investment of implementing microtransit, something that just doesn't exist in our industry right now. And it takes account of the full impact of a microtransit system at just a few clicks of a button. And this is, I think, what we mean when we say that we help agencies to plan the road beyond recovery, not just the road to it. So you might be asking, okay, it's all well and good showing me a slick demo of a new product that you've developed in your offices in Vancouver, but what are the steps that I, as a public transit agency, should take right now? And so for us, I think the message that we want you to take away from this presentation is that it's all about looking beyond the horizons you thought you were sure about, you thought you knew before COVID-19 hit. And essentially, we're asking you to experiment. And through three kind of key steps. Firstly, as I showed you, Spare Realize is a really neat way to virtually prototype new on-demand transit systems without having to deploy any vehicles or drivers on the road, all from the comfort of your own desk. And then as a second step, our team can work with you to produce some kind of cutting-edge impact assessments that take into account the full effects of running on-demand transit in your city. And as I said, both the benefits and the drawbacks of that financially, but also on the wider environment and society. It's not just about financial bottom lines, but we know that's a pressing concern for all agencies, especially right now. And finally, you can consider the ease with which you can launch an on-demand transit system once everything is in place. As Oliver at the beginning of this presentation alluded to, our mission as a company is to enable anybody to launch these systems in just a few seconds. And we appreciate we're not quite there right yet, near future, hopefully so. But the products and features we're developing make it possible to launch incredible microtransit and paratransit services in just a few days, if that's the pace at which you want to move as an agency. And so in summary, the advantage of this three-step process, these stepping stones, is that they all have a very low barrier to entry. They don't involve investing huge amounts of money. They're cheap, they're rapid, and you can iterate quickly. And as Christopher said, I think we should all embrace failure in pilot stages like this, something that's not been encouraged traditionally in transit before. Because as we all know, as we all tell our friends and our kids when they're going through rough patches, is that that's how we learn best, is in the times that are trying. And only when we figured out what makes sense, what doesn't, that's when you can launch a system with confidence. And that's what we hope we can help through our technology. So in summary, we really believe it's time to build something new and to build back stronger. But where I think we differ from a lot of other companies and a lot of kind of players in this market is that we're saying you can't do it alone by just ramping up what you did in the past. As an agency, I think you need to accept that you have to fit into the rest of a very, a growing and a rapidly changing mobility ecosystem. But that all parts of this puzzle can fit together. We can't just abandon the fact that there's all separate silos that won't ever work together. It can, but that will take effort and innovation to do. And I hope that what we've demonstrated very briefly here is that spares technology is an important piece of that puzzle to help agencies transition to becoming mobility providers, as Christopher said. It's all well and good us preparing the best software in the world, but without forward-looking transit agencies like yourselves, nothing will change, and that's the worst of all scenarios for us. So Spare Realize and other features that Spare is developing is here to help empower you to plan and eventually build, we hope, your road beyond recovery. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. I think we'll probably get some questions, and we're very happy to dig into further detail if there's anything that's been raised. And so I'll hand it over to Ollie, I think, to moderate that.
All right, thank you so much, Jerome. That was a very informative presentation. So again, if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to use the questions tab on the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. There was a question here saying, you mentioned you work with 4 Canadian cities, and you probably can't disclose who they are, but could you explain what you're doing with them? Christopher, you're still muted, I think, too.
Christopher, do you want to take this one?
Hey there. Sorry, had some technical issues. Yeah, so basically what we're doing is really taking them on this road through this planning stage, really looking at this holistically and figuring out, okay, where does their destination want to, where do they want the destination to do, and then help them come up with the supporting infrastructure and the supporting tools to actually do that. So really utilizing the Spare Realize capabilities and looking at kind of where are the goals that they're trying to achieve and start like kind of planning services around that. Obviously not just looking at what we do as a core, which is this on-demand transit, but also like on a more holistic basis. How do they plan? How do they use this Spare Realize to better plan their fixed route, for example? So that's kind of the overview of that.
Okay, thank you. Next question is saying, Can it access other modes of travel that would connect to the new microtransit zone?
Do you want to take that, Jerome?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Yes. So as far as the question being, can you use microtransit to be a connector to a kind of wider multimodal ecosystem, I think is how I interpret that question. The answer is yes, and we have plenty of partners. Christopher mentioned DART being one of them, probably at the forefront of integrating multimodality into their operations as a transit agency. So yeah, you can draw your, in real life or in this fake virtual world, you can draw your zones to be set up in a way that you will connect with large transit hubs, whether they're big bus stations or light rail stations, that kind of thing. And the beauty of a prototyping tool is that you can really kind of play with all the levers to work out whether you are setting up a system that's going to be primarily running at peak times, whether it's throughout the day, when your savings might be best, whether you want to introduce dynamic pricing so that people who are trying to connect to various different services, whether they're transit services or things like healthcare or shopping, whether they're priced slightly differently to enable the diagram that we were talking about in terms of factors of success, that we want to not only build something that's efficient as a network that balances ridership and coverage, and also that's that has a resilience element to it, because what we mean by resilience really is something, a system that's able to bounce back from shocks. And those shocks can be little things like there is a big hockey game on tonight, and so there's going to be a huge number of riders through the system, all the way through to an individual large protest, such as what we saw during the Black Lives Matter movement. That is enabled by the fact that you have lots and lots of players in your multimodal ecosystem. So when one goes down, others can pick up the slack. And that's actually what we often say to our customers, is that on-demand microtransit is in itself a resilient thing. It can connect very well to other modes of transport, but because you have lots of different shuttles that kind of move around like ants through the city, if one is taken out either by a driver who's ill or because of repairs or whatever it is, the others can kind of help cover it in different zones. So there's that resilience element, but I think what we really want to emphasize is that there is this equity piece, which as a transit agency, transit industry, we've talked about a lot, but until now, I don't think we've had the tools to be able to really measure what equity means, but also track whether we are moving towards a more equitable system. And so a virtual prototyping tool like Realize allows you to make those decisions ahead of time before you grandfather in systems that might not kind of last and will not be equitable and will leave certain populations behind.
Perfect. So I'll go to this question, which is kind of related. It was saying, how does accessibility and affordability fit within your agenda? And how is your idea different from the other mobility options like ride sharing?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. How does accessibility and affordability fit within your agenda? And how is your idea any different from other mobility options like ride sharing?
I mean, I would say that those things fit extremely into our agenda. I mean, we're really looking at this as kind of the curb cut effect. I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but our idea here is really to provide both accessible transportation in terms of the financial point for the passenger, but also from the actual accessibility of the vehicles and the service. And by doing so, we really believe that we can get this curb cut effect where we saw a few decades ago when the curb cut was introduced, that it has much greater value to the wider society than the people that it was specifically targeting.
Okay, thank you so much. And then we've got only one more question here, so if anyone else has any more, feel free to submit. It says, Realize is a compelling tool. Does it work for smaller communities or more rural regions, something like the population range of 1,500 to 10,000? And is there enough data?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we have done is that we produced kind of the basic framework for enable to ingest open data, and currently we ingest data that's open from both the US, from Canada, and some European countries. But we also have the capability of ingesting additional data that could be provided to us by these smaller communities. So, it's obviously easy for us to kind of showcase, Vancouver and, how much stuff we can get around that. But I do think that a tool like this can be extremely valuable for the smaller communities. And we work with smaller communities across the world to do that. And actually, one of the Canadian cities we're working on is in that range of population.
One thing I might add as well is that as a data science team, we are very aware that numbers only tell you half the story. And speaking with people on the ground, whether they're operators, people who set up these systems, the planners, but also the riders themselves, that half of the story is often untold, or at least not reflected in the way that transit systems are set up. So we're putting in a lot of effort to reach out to those communities and, COVID permitting, meet up with them somehow and understand what they expect from things like this. And that, as Christopher said, it's all well and good doing big, broad metrics that cover the entirety of Metro Vancouver. But in reality, when you're a small town of 3,000 people, the reality is you have one school, maybe one library, and one kind of mall. And so the accessibility to those are above and beyond the most important thing that you might care about as either a school student or a senior person living in a community, in a kind of senior care home. And so I think it's about tailoring what the platform shows and how we're able to help the planners who work in each of these specific use cases, how to help them reflect the specific needs of their communities. And we can't do that just from lofty offices in downtown Vancouver. So reaching out to those communities and speaking with them and really workshopping with them has been our kind of MO for the last few years.
All right, thank you so much. So there's at least two more questions, and then we'll call it there. So it says, how does Spare realize import data on socioeconomics and demographics, and what are the analytics that it does with respect to equity? And then also as a related question, there was, what kind of data do you use for your models, and how is privacy addressed?
Great question. So I'll take this on the data side. So a lot of the socioeconomic data is actually openly available. Certain countries have better standards than others. The US is actually very, very good, although you have to know how to use it. A lot of the maps that I showed you, those heat maps, those are derived from openly available data. Even the locations of things like shopping and healthcare, those can be dragged from things like Google Maps. So from that point of view, we're not doing anything that isn't available to everybody. But what we do, the special USP that we have as a provider of microtransit already is that we have ways of validating our models or making our models reflect reality, because we know that certain socioeconomic data is tangibly related to this number of rides or this performance of a system based on our actual data. So we ingest that data on one half of the kind of data side of things, and we essentially, that means that our models, more than maybe a model developed by academics who may not have access to the same data as us, ours in a way reflects the true reality of how transit responds to demand. With regards to privacy, so even I, as a lead data scientist, don't get to see any individualized data on people's identity. The trip data that we have and that we store, which is huge, is in no way linked to rider names. We have anonymized rider IDs, for example, and we don't ever use the data to sort of try and triangulate where people live or move. We look at it as an aggregate. And if and when we do share that data with our partners through a separate product that we have, which is our Analyze platform, which is the way that customers themselves who are running services can track the performance of their systems, they can never see individualized data, and they just see metrics that are averaged over hours or days. So in terms of the privacy element, we are fully GDPR compliant.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. So last question. Can you provide any insight into coordinating amongst different cities, agencies, and other stakeholders, and how you would do such things usually?
Well, it's a very, very good question. I think there's definitely a technology piece of this puzzle, which I think is good to be aware of, but I also do think there's a big policy piece of this, where you're looking at having cities being interested, first of all, of coordinating, and that might not always be the easiest thing to do. So also even within cities, there's so many transportation services that are provided within a city or within an area that isn't run by the same place, right? For example, a classic case that we have seen, is that transit agency might be running these paratransit services and microtransit services, but there might be other services that are provided by the local government or the city that is not coordinated by the transit agency. And we're seeing a big trend in most areas of looking at how can we coordinate these things, how can we actually commingle these services together in order to make it a better service for the actual individual passenger, and then significantly lower the cost of providing those services. One of the most interesting ways we've seen at doing this is in Denmark, where they have this system called Flex Denmark that's been up and running for the past 20 years, that have done a tremendous good job in both solving the policy and really solving this policy question. And then now with the onset of modern technology, there are tools that you can use, like for example Spare, to better coordinate this from a pure technology standpoint. But I do think it also comes with a certain aspect of looking at how can we push for open standards within this, so that we don't get into where we've actually been in the past, where you're really looking at lock-in from multiple parties.
Thank you so much. So I think you answered all the questions perfectly. So that's all the time we have right now. We went a little bit over 5 minutes. I hope that's okay with everyone. So I just want to thank you guys from Spare for doing this wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I hope everyone has found that informative and has a good afternoon. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.